competing with network rail arguments. So I know that we need to keep the time, otherwise people will be afraid that the railways aren't keeping to and session is going to be looking at research funding, and with a practitioner and a funder. Roberta, do you want to head us off?
Okay. Well, thank you for asking to talk about funding in Europe. I'm going to set a couple of caveats before I embark on this. My knowledge of Horizon 2020 is based on a very helpful UKRO presentation at my university a few weeks back. A very complex website that needs to be navigated very carefully, and my experience of working in an FP7 project. So I'm going to start with that, actually. And also I want to broaden out in terms of our discussions of possible opportunities for funding in Europe. Horizon 2020 is going to be the obvious place to go. However, for those of us who are doing research on Europe and the EU, there are other opportunities that are perhaps less well known and well established that we ought to consider very carefully, and that's actually the institutions, though these need to come with a few caveats. And the general considerations that I think we're all aware, but all of us who are here are aware of, but perhaps is a message that still needs to go out to some of our colleagues, is the importance of networks and multidisciplinarity. And actually, I would link the opportunities provided by SRC UK funding, such as the SRC for developing international networks, research seminar series, to actually provide a springboard for broader European-based applications. So I want to say a little bit about where my experience comes from in terms of the way that I understand the European funding regime. I was involved, I was a work package coordinator on an FP7 project that was led by a developmental psychologist. It was very much embedded within a psychology network, and it was a 3-year project. And it's a good thing that's finished for about a year, because now I can talk about it and I'm not quite so traumatized by the whole experience of conducting proper multidisciplinary research. It was quite large, and actually the funding looked good to start with. Actually, once you start covering it out between 9 partners, 8 countries, several meetings, work packages including political theory, policy analysis, surveys, survey of existing data, interviews, and focus groups is actually not a whole lot of money. But that actually goes to the strengths of the kind of work that you can conduct as part of it. And I think actually it's worth it. When Neil asked me to do this, I actually thought about, okay, what made this network successful? And actually the PI who led the network was also on the reserve list for another FP7 project. So obviously he cracked the formula. He understood how to get the funding from the European Commission. And I started thinking about how PDOP and the second project came about, and actually it originated in an established network. There was a core group of people who trusted each other. And ultimately, I think trust is key to making those kind of networks function. It was linked to a multidisciplinary center, which actually brought together people from sociology, politics, psychology, political psychology, as well as some of the natural sciences, who then could tap into additional research networks. And that actually helped to build up this consortium that was successful twice. The interdisciplinarity of it, and again I think that's what made the project successful in the end, is that he managed to bring everybody together at the conceptual stage. It wasn't easy. Still bear the scars of one meeting in which he locked us in for until about 9, 10 o'clock at night, until we actually agreed the methodology. But actually it worked in the end. So there are some real challenges to doing this kind of work, and some of which I've already talked about. But from my perspective, and this is something that I've been trying to talk to my colleagues for the last 5 years, and some of them really get it. Others, they're a bit more reluctant to engage in this kind of group hunting or hunting in packs, because it goes against their traditional instincts as academics to work as an individual. But I think actually as head of department, what I find useful is to create a critical mass of colleagues who are open-minded to look out for funding as a pack and actually draw on each other's networks. Because actually the potential for innovation is quite great, and that's certainly the experience that I took away from this network. And having conversations with developmental psychologists about what is gender and how you actually understand citizenship and gender in a meaningful way, it's testing, very, at the same time also equally rewarding, and it made me think in a very different way. So that's kind of the background, and that's FP7. And so where do we go from here? First of all, Horizon 2020 has only just been adopted, I think it was about 3-4 days ago. What is it? It's a new research funding mechanism. It will last until 2020, and it includes the Marie Curie streams as well as the European Research Council. It's a fairly hefty budget of 70 million euros, and there are two key priorities. I mean, looking at the website, it becomes really clear. There are two key priorities. One is overcoming crisis, and the second one, I put there sustainability, but actually I would say sustainable growth. And I think you can see the link to crisis as being the top priority and concern. The structure is fairly complex, so I would actually advise you, because I found the UKRO presentation really helpful to try and make sense of the way that the information is presented on the Commission website. Liaise with your universities to bring in someone from UKRO to give you a presentation, to talk you through, and talk directly with the European liaison officers at your own institutions. I've actually put in a timeline which is in the handout, and I've also put in at the back some links, some websites which you can go to. The calls are from the website as of yesterday. It's opening in, I think, 25 days. So it is a space to watch. And there are three key pillars: excellent science, industrial leadership, and societal change. I think we can benefit from all three pillars, though some of them will require us and our colleagues to think more creatively a bit about the way that we approach and fit our research more broadly. So excellent science, I think that's actually quite interesting because it includes the ERC and the Marie Curie. I just want to say a couple of things about Marie Curie, actually the ERC. There is now the possibility to conduct collaborative research. It doesn't need, on the website it states that there is no requirement for it to be pan-European. So it can be a collaboration with British-based institutions. I think from all the evidence that I saw, the UK institutions have done quite well out of FP7 funding. And I think UKRO is actually setting itself up to help us to continue to do well from European Commission funding. One area that I think certainly in the social sciences we may not have actually tapped into as much as the Marie Curie opportunities. How many here have had Marie Curie fellows attached? Okay. A few. There are, this year the competition is getting greater. I think there were 4,000 applications for the Trans-European Mobility Marie Curie applications. But it is something that I think in terms of bringing in scholars, we need to really consider. Future of emerging technologies, I think we can actually, looking at the detail, looks interesting, but you're required to work with STEM subjects. So it does depend on colleagues. Industrial leadership, this is perhaps the most problematic for many political sciences, international relations colleagues, because it does call for public-private partnership. It does call for increasing private funding of research. Not an easy fit, but again, interesting potential for innovation, particularly if we think about analyzing governance structures of new and emerging technologies. So there are ways that actually political science research can fit in that. And the most obvious pillar for us is the tackling societal change. And again, here's the list of all the areas that are being identified as key issues or problems. Again, crisis economy, society, well-being seem to be the issues that appear time and time again. But, and here's what I said in the beginning, there are other opportunities for research if you have colleagues who work on Europe and the EU. The Jean Monnet Action Programme, most people think of the Jean Monnet Action Programme in relation to the chairs and the modules, the Centre for Excellence, but they are also funding research activities. They are funding multilateral research groups, albeit of collaborations of chairs, but nevertheless. And the others, which is emerging, I think, is through European institutions. The European Commission representation in the UK last summer launched a tender to do work, knowledge transfer activities. It wasn't a huge amount of money, I think it was up to about £40,000. And the turnaround time is very, very short. It's about 2.5 to 3 weeks. The same is for the DGs. The DG Justice, if you're interested, has just published a call for research/consultancy type work, as does the European Parliament. I think the last round of calls were in the summer. I haven't checked recently. Again, the turnaround time for those is about 6 to 8 weeks. They require networks, and it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. It's about establishing a network both within the UK and across Europe, networks that you can draw on at fairly short notice to actually submit those applications. I would strongly urge colleagues to look at the DG calls because they are potentially really interesting, and research can be factored in. Perhaps not in the traditional sense of RC UK funding, but considering the kind of climate that we're all faced with, it is something that we ought to urge colleagues to consider and consider seriously. And here I've actually added some links that you have on the handout about some of the calls that I've talked about today. But there are pots of money in Europe, and you need to invest time to actually find them. But I think it can be quite a useful exercise, particularly going forward as funding becomes more challenging to secure in the future.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you very much. No, we'll do the same as the previous panels. Just on ESRC, who've got loads of money apparently, and just looking for opportunities to.
Well, I don't know where that scurrilous rumour came from, but.
So Phil has a check-off here, and do you know how to get on to the next thing? Jack?
What's it?
Desktop.
It should still be at the bottom.
It's still on the bottom. I'm sorry, it's okay.
Yeah.
That's not
I think I know it. I've just got this to go.
Oh, I see. All part. Sorry, it's all part of the same.
Yes.
Yeah, I've got you. Yeah. Okay.
So if you just do a click on the should
Okay.
Yeah.
I keep that.
Okay.
That's why we
Thanks.
collaborate so well with STEM subjects, because
I've got a few slides here. I will say a little bit about funding, and I'm not going to talk in detail about particular schemes, but I also want to cover a few sort of more general sort of issues in the sort of time slot that I've got. Just keep an eye on the time. And I thought, let's start off at least on a positive note. I will say a little bit about money in a minute. I mean, some of the things we've done or are working on recently that I think we want to sort of trumpet as achievements for ESRC and the social sciences over the last year. I mean, one is, I think, our success in getting quite a lot of additional money from various sort of government capital funding mechanisms. I mean, previously for the big surveys like Understanding Society, the Life Study, and more recently for what's often been called the Big Data Agenda, which for us includes the new Administrative Data Research Network, which we've just announced. And that did involve getting 64 million of additional capital funding in competition with the other research councils. And that's not something, again, we were into a few years ago. So, and I think in terms of building our future capability, that's been quite a significant achievement. I've mentioned the What Works initiative. ESRC is a key partner. You've just heard about that from Ross. We are co-funding some of the centres and looking at the scope for funding some new additional ones. And I think our involvement in that initiative has been valued actually quite strongly by Cabinet Office and the other government departments, because it does, I think, help give the assurance of independence around that initiative and those centres that is necessary really for their credibility and success. Some work that I maybe mentioned earlier in the day, I don't know the work we're doing obviously on the future of the UK and Scotland's pretty high visibility at the moment, and getting quite a lot of coverage as you might expect, and that will undoubtedly ramp up over the next year up to the date of the referendum. But I think we're pleased with this as an example of ESRC responding quite quickly to a particular agenda and not taking, as I think we've been accused of in the past, sort of 2 or 3 years to sort of work out what we're going to do and commission research and get it started and so on. But also I think to position it in a way that thus far at least has said, look, we're addressing a controversial, highly contested issue, but we're doing it in an objective manner that is not partisan. And I think government departments, the political parties, both sides of the debate thus far have accepted that. And Charlie would obviously be able to comment on that far better than I can. And I think the other thing to flag up is the range of things we're doing in the sort of broadly terms of impact public engagement area. We've just had the annual festival with however many 165 different events across the UK. We launched our annual Impact Prize, which got quite prominent coverage, and our annual publication has now become something of a sort of regular output. Britain in 2014, which is now available and on sale. Just some examples of the sorts of things we're doing at the moment to have a sort of wider outreach. Just one sort of slide here to sort of illustrate the big data network. I won't talk about that in detail. I think it probably merits a separate sort of presentation and discussion in its own right. But just to give you a sense of the things that we're supporting through this additional capital funding. So we've just announced 4 admin data centres across the UK. We're just in the process of announcing that the centres will be funding on business and local government, and then we'll be moving on to looking at what we can do in the areas of the third sector and social media, with the intention that there will be this huge sort of UK-wide network of activity, making data that was hitherto sort of inaccessible much easier to use and to link with other data sets to really help us understand some of the big questions. Now for the sort of, perhaps slightly more sort of sombre note. Depends whether you're a glass half full or half empty person, sort of whether you think we have got lots of money. I mean, I think the reality is, of course, that for a period of time from 1997 and certainly until 2010, we did see a period of quite substantial growth in terms of the overall science budget and ESRC's budget. And it meant we were able to take on new initiatives and do more things and a wider range of things. As you all know, we've got flat cash in 2010, and we're currently waiting for the outcome of the current spending review process. You will have seen that the Chancellor yesterday announced that BIS as a department has to make cuts. How that's going to filter down to us in terms of individual research council allocations, we don't yet know, and there are indications we won't know until the new year what our budget is for 2015-16. And although we've been told that we should then take that as our sort of budget sort of baseline going forward, clearly, there will be a general election in 2015 and potentially a new government and another spending review. So the longer term prognosis is uncertain. But I think thus far we've made effective arguments to BIS and ultimately to Treasury about the importance of maintaining the research budget. I think it's fair to say we do have a supportive minister who has pushed that argument within government on our behalf. But clearly we are in a period of financial uncertainty and we may have to make some tough decisions. So when we sent into BIS our plans for how we would respond to the outcome, we had to present scenarios, including what we would do with the various types of reductions. And obviously we'll have to look at the extent to which we can continue to support the current level of grant studentships and other activities if we do have a cut. So I just sort of get that on the table. I think there's a continuing challenge for us in terms of balancing the needs of government, but certainly in the context of what works, that's very salient, interest of business and other sectors, and obviously the community. We're still juggling, I think, with the sort of demand management success rates problem. We have seen a reduction in demand and a consequent increase in success rates over the last year or so. That's partly because we stopped certain schemes such as small grants. But I think what we're now seeing is a higher proportion of applications for longer, larger grants coming through our sort of responsive mechanisms, and of course that has an impact on the success rate. So that's something we're keeping an eye on. Our council will be looking in the new year at whether we do need to take further steps to limit demand so that the success rates are at a reasonable level. Another issue, of course, that you'll all be aware of is institutional concentration. We have our doctoral training centres, which cover 40-odd institutions, but obviously not an equal number. And the data on our research funding generally indicates that the top 20 get roughly half of our budget. We've just announced something called impact acceleration accounts, which I'll mention again in a minute, which is a way of enabling the institutions to have more control over how they manage their knowledge exchange activities, but again, that is going to be concentrated. So it is an issue, and I was at an event last week at the College of Policing in the context of our Work Centre, talking about how we could improve relationships between universities and local police forces. Fine, worth doing, but nearly all the institutions in the room were those who basically don't get any ESRC money, and I think there is a real problem actually. We want to encourage more impact and knowledge exchange across the piece, but our own funding is concentrated, how we manage to sort of square that circle. The other thing I'll mention in terms of the current challenges is the continual push really on the research councils to be more efficient and effective. There's always been an ongoing debate about whether we should just have one research council, whether ESRC and AHRC should be merged, etc., which I think we have managed to hold off for the time being in the current review that's just taken place. But I think the deal is that we will have to continue to work more closely together. That, of course, has many benefits in terms of the money you save on administration, in theory at least, you can spend on research. In practice, it gets returned to the Treasury, it seems to me. And of course, there's far more cross-council, cross-disciplinary work than there used to be. But it does also mean sometimes that we may be pushed into policy directions that, if we were making the decision just for ourselves, may not be our preferred choice. Okay, let me very quickly sort of just run through some sort of funding issues, having sort of touched on those sort of broad questions. Just a reminder really about the share of the cake in terms of how we divide up the ESRC budget. And that proportionate share hasn't changed very much for a number of years, with one exception, which is the amount of the budget now spent on methods and infrastructure. But I think I ought to emphasise that's not at the expense of other things. That represents the additional capital funding I just talked about, rather than making cuts to research or postgraduate training. It's something we keep under regular review, but I think the Council's view has been for some time that this is about the right distribution between, if I can put it crudely, the responsive and directed research and our support for training and skills. And a reminder as well that what we try to do is provide a range of funding opportunities, both in terms of target group, thinking in terms of the applicants from early career right through to most senior levels, and in terms of the amount of money that can be applied for, ranging obviously from PhD support through to our funding for research centres. And this is an attempt to sort of represent, in a diagrammatic form, that spectrum on both cost and career stage that we provide. So a little bit more about that here. Obviously at the PhD level through the DTCs, at the immediate sort of postdoctoral level through our Future Research Leaders scheme. For more senior people, obviously professorial fellowships, the ability to apply for centres and large grants. So that we hope there is the sort of seamless opportunity throughout the career stage for people to apply for ESRC funding, albeit that many of those schemes, of course, are highly competitive. And at the moment, we are currently running Centres and Large Grants competition with decisions during the new year. We just have the closing date for our secondary data analysis initiative and for our future research leaders scheme. So the decisions on all of those will be out in the new year. So none of those are actually live at the moment, in the sense that the closing date has passed for the current round. Just a reminder of our strategic priorities. I'm sure you're familiar with these, but also a reminder that they do not drive and govern everything that we do. And the standard research grants mechanism remains open to applications across the whole of our remit and is not influenced by these priority areas. These are to help the Council think about where we put our more targeted investment in terms of collaborative arrangements with other funders, possibly providing a steer in our research centres competition, and of course our work with the other research councils. I thought I'd just flag up a couple of areas that will be of particular interest to you in terms of political science. There's the Global Uncertainties Cross-Council programme on which we lead, and the current focus is on three themes at the moment. There's going to be, I think, a town meeting and a consultation process early in the new year to sort of refine the next stage of funding opportunities within that programme. And similarly, the work that we've decided to take forward on the debate about Europe. I mean, this was partly stimulated by, obviously, the Conservatives saying that they would hold a referendum if they were the party of government next time round. And also, I think we've drawn on the model of the Future of Scotland programme here as an example of responding to a current debate, but not framing it too narrowly. So this programme is not just about if there was a referendum, what would the implications be. It's more broadly about the UK within Europe, so that in the event that there isn't a majority Conservative government in 2015, that this work remains valid and important. And at the moment, we've just appointed a coordinator for that initiative, and again carrying out a scoping exercise, and I think holding a town meeting to help sort of refine the agenda for that work. So some opportunities that will be coming up shortly for colleagues in the political science community, although clearly none of these initiatives are single discipline, and that of course is the case for pretty much everything we do. Just a word about international collaboration, which ties in with what Roberta's just been talking about, and our commitment really to embed an international dimension to everything that we do, and to work closely with European partners. You should be aware we have the Open Research Area sort of responsive scheme, which I think has been very successful in terms of working with other European countries up to now, but has now been expanded to include the National Science Foundation. We do, of course, have the RCUK offices in the US, India and China to facilitate links there, and you would have seen the announcement yesterday in the autumn statement that there's a commitment to strengthen our collaboration, particularly with the emerging economies. We're keen to be involved in Horizon 2020 and to sort of provide support to the social science community to put successful bids into that programme, and some of the national contact points are actually located within ESRC. Typically the UK has punched above its weight in terms of European funding schemes, and we obviously want to enable that to continue. And the other thing to flag up, of course, is that we do have our major research collaboration with DFID. It's our biggest sort of co-funded initiative with a government department. Obviously the DFID budget has been ring-fenced since 2010. They do have a substantial research budget, so they are the biggest single sort of income stream for ESRC in terms of additional external funding. And just a bit more about partnership and collaboration, because I think that's one area of our activity that really has changed over the last 5 years or so. So that figure you see there of 20 million additional external co-funding on top of our sort of core grant from BIS, that figure at the turn of the century was 2 million. I mean, it really has been a change in the way in which we sort of operate. I think it's fair to say, though, that a lot of that additional co-funding is from charities, government departments, international partners, not very much from business and the private sector. And it still remains a challenge for us to engage business and to generate sort of additional co-funding and partnership with them. I mean, there are one or two things we now do. We have the Enterprise Research Centre, which is co-funded with the banks. But I think particularly in a period of austerity, that's still proving quite a challenge. I mentioned the impact acceleration accounts, which I guess most of you will be aware of, and we've been holding meetings just over the last week or two to talk about how they will operate in practice. And this is partly, I'll be honest, an administrative efficiency, because we're essentially giving a block grant to institutions saying you've got a wide portfolio of ESRC funded research. You're best placed to decide how that ought to be used to increase the impact of that research, rather than applying to us for small amounts of money here and there, you know, to give you little grants to do particular single activities. So it gives more autonomy to the institutions, it's less administration for us, but we hope it will also have some of the other benefits you can see in the slides. I mean, its use is not confined solely to ESRC funded research. It will, I hope, enable link up within institutions to work in